It's true, we've covered Rise of the Tomb Raider so many times over the past couple of years that it now has its own playlist. But this is by no means a bad thing. It simply demonstrates the love and care that developer Nixxes has poured into maintaining this game over the years. From supporting the aging Xbox 360 to the PlayStation 4 Pro and PSVR all the way up to the Xbox One X, Nixxes has certainly become the caretaker for Crystal Dynamics' most recent outing. The only thing missing at this point is a Switch port. So recently we talked about the Xbox One X iteration after playing through the demo at Gamescom, but Rich had a recent opportunity to capture the same demo a few weeks back at an Xbox showcase. Thanks to that, we have full capture of the game running through each of its 3 available modes. Before we jump into that, however, you might notice a variation in colors between Xbox One X and the other versions. Now, we can't say for certain just yet, but it appears that this may be due to the change in tone mapping due to the inclusion of true HDR support, a very nice feature for this version of the game. Now, this footage is not using HDR, of course, but HDR can have an impact on the way the game handles lighting, which might explain the difference. Alright then, so if you missed the original video or need a simple reminder, the Xbox One X version offers 3 choices: a native 4K mode, an enriched mode, and a high frame rate mode. A lot like the PS4 Pro version. But let's start with the 4K mode, which in this case is a native 4K mode. Considering how demanding Rise of the Tomb Raider is on the PC, it's pretty impressive to see native 4K in a console. Of course, the level of detail is pushed back compared to the PC version, but it holds up better than you'd think, and is pretty much on par with the original Xbox One release. Unfortunately, the Prophet's Tomb level, which is the one available in this demo, is just about the worst stage for drawing conclusions on detail settings, but from what we can tell, most of the settings are equivalent to the PS4 Pro's 4K checkerboard mode, which in turn is lower than the PC's highest possible settings. Oh wait, did you catch that? Let's rewind real quick. If you look here on the PC side, we see a reflection. But if you let the scene play out, it disappears. At first I thought this was a missing feature, but in some ways it almost seems like they've simply corrected a bug. So how about the PS4 Pro then? Well, that same reflection is there, and this time it does not disappear. I guess we'll have to wait for the final build to see what's going on here. Alright, so the overall level of detail is mostly on par with the PS4 Pro then, but there are some improvements here that apply to all modes. And this is primarily centered on texture quality. Pretty big difference at a glance, right? Now, there was a lot of confusion surrounding this comparison the last time around, however, due to the procedural dirt system, which, by the way, is very cool, but we did eventually manage to draw a perfect comparison here. The main difference here, and one that persists in this demo, is the lack of depth of field on Xbox One X, alongside higher resolution textures compared to the PS4 Pro version. So yeah, even with all the dirt taken into account on the PS4 Pro side, clearly Xbox One X still offers much higher resolution textures, and we see that in the demo we played as well. The extra memory on Xbox One X simply means that textures are nearly on par with the PC's highest setting, and as I mentioned earlier, those textures do persist across all 3 display modes on Xbox One X, so you'll always be able to enjoy higher quality assets regardless of the selected option. Now let's talk about depth of field. In certain scenes, this effect can certainly blur textures, like this PC comparison here. A small amount of perceived sharpness is lost due to the depth of field. So when we place Xbox One X without depth of field against another platform with the effect enabled, it does have an impact on texture clarity. Look closely though, and the assets do look basically the same. But what if we disable it on the PC and compare that against Xbox One X? The textures wind up looking basically the same, which again demonstrates that the Xbox One X is using the PC's highest quality textures. Now what if we compare the PC with the very high textures and depth of field enabled against the PS4 Pro? Then we can see that yes, the PC textures are indeed higher resolution than the PS4 Pro, which means the Pro is basically using the high textures as it's labeled in the PC version. So, if we go back and compare the Xbox One X against the Pro again, then we know exactly how depth of field impacts the results, and it's still clear that the Xbox X has an advantage. And after all that, hopefully the situation is now as clear as the very high textures. Now, regarding the effect itself, it is certainly strange that depth of field is missing, as it was present in the original Xbox One release. It'll be interesting to see if it reappears in the final build, and if so, whether or not they use the higher quality bokeh depth of field available on the PC. There's one other potential issue in this demo as well, and that is performance. While the frame rate is reasonably steady most of the time, the busier sections do drop below 30 frames per second with mild tearing when using the native 4K mode. Now, we don't see any tearing on the PlayStation 4, mind you, but the original Xbox One version does also make use of an adaptive VSync solution, so really this is nothing new on Microsoft's platform. Now, these same areas do manage to run consistently on the Pro in comparison, but there are busier scenes later in the game, such as the Geothermal Valley, which definitely exhibits slowdown when using the checkerboard 4K mode on the Pro. Which means at the moment, the native 4K mode on Xbox One X is probably going to need some additional work before it's ready for prime time, but again, this is just a demo, so we'll have to wait and see. It's also worth keeping in mind that any non-interactive cutscenes like this one run with VSync enabled, and the water in this scene definitely causes problems for the system in native 4K mode. So with slowdown to worry about, what's a Tomb Raider to do then? Why, use the best mode in the demo, of course, the Enriched 4K mode. Essentially what we're seeing here is a reconstruction technique similar to checkerboard rendering used to produce a pixel count of 2160p, just like on the Pro. Unlike the Pro, however, this is used in conjunction with the Enriched mode, which offers improved details such as tessellation, improved LODs, and more. The Enriched option on the Pro is, of course, just limited to 1080p in comparison. So not only does it look great on Xbox One X, it also offers better performance. The areas which struggled to hold 30 FPS in native 4K mode now run without a hitch. Yes, you lose some fidelity when using sparse rendering, which is similar to checkerboard rendering, but as we've been saying over the last year, it gets very close to delivering a 4K image. Can you spot the difference between native 4K resolution and sparse rendering? The two manage to look extremely similar. Very impressive results. And just to give you an idea of how it's running in Enriched mode, here's the most demanding gameplay sequence from the demo. Unlike the native 4K mode, however, the Xbox One X simply chews through this scene without problem when using the Enriched sparse rendering mode. When combined with the extra visual details and smoother performance, this could turn out to be the very best way to play Rise of the Tomb Raider on consoles. And now it's time for the high frame rate mode. As the name implies then, this is a mode with a higher overall frame rate, but not one promising a locked 60 frames per second, hence its absence in the name. Now despite that, the demo at least comes very close to hitting a locked 60 frames per second. The drop in resolution is certainly noticeable here, but the improvement in fluidity and controller response makes for a nice change of pace. It simply feels fantastic to play in this mode, as we've learned from playing the PC version at 60 frames per second. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite last. You see, the very last section of the demo does exhibit minor slowdown and tearing compared to the rest of the level. Now to be fair, these dips are rather minimal in this particular area, but this also happens to be one of the least demanding levels in the game. So if we're seeing minor dips here in the Prophet's Tomb, then it's fair to assume that later areas like Geothermal Valley, for instance, will struggle to hit 60 frames per second. At least we can confirm that it's faster than the PlayStation 4 Pro version running in its high frame rate mode. The Pro drops more frames here in comparison to the Xbox One X, so we're still seeing an overall improvement in frame rate consistency. We'll just have to wait until the final release to fully understand just how much of an improvement this is, however. Ultimately, this demo is just our first encounter with this particular iteration of the game. Overall impressions are good, the improvements over PS4 Pro are readily evident, and it's likely to become the best way to experience Rise of the Tomb Raider on consoles. The big questions we have then are related to the missing features and some of the unstable performance when using the native 4K mode. The lack of depth of field is certainly puzzling, but it seems that it will likely return in the final game. But it's the drops in the native 4K mode that are a bit more of a concern here. If we're seeing issues with performance in this level, then it really could become a problem later on. But then again, Nixxes also has time to finish adjusting the game for launch, and if successful, perhaps those slowdown issues will be eliminated altogether. That's all we have for now though. If you found this early comparison interesting or useful, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, or follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.